Exactly. I'll take that home.
How are you?
Good, how are you doing?
Good.
Everything's doing great today.
Doing okay. They're gonna get
Leslie
raised
loves
today,
it.
so that's why he's not here.
Give me a stare.
really?
Oh, was it the Alzheimer's? But
So,
My husband's a reading, I don't know this book, but that's what I try to keep up my business.
yes. Yep, so, I think it's gonna be a long road, but
you really have a shot at this stuff. Your whole
it's
body.
going okay, so. But, they do say that they try to get him out
She
there
everything.
because they
She
want
was
to
frozen
work
out
on
real bad.
now.
Sometimes I'm
Because of
just
everything.
shot.
Make sure you say it.
Sound like they're reading staples already.
Everything.
And, yeah. Yeah, it'll be interesting. They're meeting with the physical therapist also today and stuff.
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to the Board of Supervisors meeting, June 3rd, 2025. Is there any changes to the agenda?
I have none.
I have none.
I have no.
You have none? Okay. We shall go on and we shall meet department heads and elected officials. Sarah Doty, County Auditor.
Good morning. We had a food drive last month in my office, and if you notice, there's food sitting on the countertop out there. Shane will be delivering that to the food bank for us today, so thank you for those who donated. Just keeping up on the fiscal year change up for insurance and getting things switched over for the new fiscal year and keeping busy. Nothing really new to report other than that.
Okay, thank you.
You are welcome.
Sheriff Glendenny.
Good morning. Jail was at, let's see, last night when we left, it was at 78, and we have 7 out of county, and this morning we jumped up to 85. So it was a busy night overnight for law enforcement. That's how it goes, but we still have 7 out of county for right now. We'll see how it goes after morning court, but moving in the right direction with our numbers. Glad to see us start the new year that way, or new budget year. Other than that, we have some transitions happening with some of our supervisors. Dave Mergia, who's a sergeant, was a sergeant of investigations. He moved to a night shift command position. And Dave Hama was promoted to lieutenant a couple months ago. He moved into his position on days just recently. Actually, today's his first day here, so we're getting kind of some shifting around done. Our deputy that's in the academy, Eric Kramer, he's starting week 5, so 11 more weeks up there, and we'll have him back and get him through the FTO. But other than that, we have lots going on, but really nothing of note from the board.
Thank you. Sheriff, or Shannon, emergency management.
Good morning. I have nothing exciting to report this morning.
Nothing about good weather, bad weather?
We are expecting some weather this evening, this afternoon and this evening, but, hopefully it'll be okay.
Thank you. Chris Pogmiller, how's public health doing?
Good morning, we're just keeping busy, nothing new to report.
Okay, thank you. Jared Laster, regional planning.
Good morning. Our regional planning is very busy this time of year, both with local land use as well as just general planning. We do have a new planner in our office, just started this week, so that should help relieve some of the staff time on some of the projects we're involved in. But in terms of land use, pretty much just normal. We have a subdivision on the agenda today, and that's all I have right now.
Okay, thank you. Chris Lee, how's conservation?
Good morning. Exciting stuff going on. We got big events coming up. This weekend is the Outdoor Youth Jamboree up in Big Hollow. So we expect bunches and bunches of people to come up there, do all the fun outdoor stuff that Big Hollow has to offer. Shooting range with instructors. Come target shoot. We got a free lunch, canoe rides, all sorts of fun stuff. So that's this weekend, and then next weekend is River Days down here on the riverfront. All things kind of celebrating river community and outdoor fun stuff. So be sure to come to those. And then our summer camps start next week. So Stars Cave is going to get kind of busy with kids coming in and out throughout the days for summer camps.
How's the water situation down at Stars Cave?
Waiting for Rathbun to run us a new line. So they thought a few weeks before they could get there and do that. So we're just
How are you gonna get these kids water when they get down there, run around and come up, Chris, I need a drink of water?
we're gonna have lots of water bottles. And we've been we got those 5-gallon water jugs that, you see on construction sites. We've got a few of those. We run up to the shop once a week or twice a week, whatever it takes to go fill those. And then they'll just have to use the pit toilet outside, so.
Thank you. How about you, Angie? How's safety department going?
Good morning. Sadly, we're busy. So just want to remind everyone that we're starting, spring weather. We are doing jobs that we hadn't done in a while, and slow down, think about what we're doing, and give your body a break.
Okay, thank you. Did I miss anybody?
We have
Becky.
Becky back there for Brian. She won't talk
Becky,
near as
where's
much,
she
but.
at?
I'll be
Right
short and
there.
sweet. That's okay. You can skip me.
No, it's gonna be a blessing listening to you instead of Mr. Carter.
I'll talk short and sweet.
You got that on record there?
He's not online either to hear it, so. Our contractor from Highway 99 moved up to Seven Ponds this morning and started milling up there. They hope to have the milling and the paving done and completed on that at the end of the week.
Okay.
So that's our biggest thing right now.
Any updates on the bridges?
No, nope,
Okay.
not yet.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Now, did I miss anybody? Nope. Seeing that, we shall move on. The correspondence, I have none here, and I, get the correspondence, Shane?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you. Move on, discussion and vote. We have accounts payable claims in the amount of $699,328.15.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Sarah?
Shane McCampbell.
Yes.
Tom Broker.
Yes.
Jim Carrey.
Yes. Now we have a resolution for the final plat of 5 subdivisions. Jared, you wanna go over that?
Probably one of the shortest names we've ever had, 3 letters, but, so this is a minor subdivision off of Flint Bottom Road, just north of the Gear Avenue intersection. So there's this 18-acre property here, actually I had a lot of people asking about this last year after it was purchased. It used to have a junkyard, along with a house at the north end of the property that, junkyard had ceased operations years ago, but when it was purchased, a excavation contractor then proceeded to clear off the southern part of the site where the junkyard used to be, and then that's been repurposed for an outdoor storage area for that business. But with the house still on the north end of the property, they're looking to sell that separately, and so that's where this subdivision comes in. It's about 2.5 acres with the land immediately surrounding that house. It does have an access easement. It does have frontage directly along Flint Bottom, but there is an existing driveway that the business intends to continue using as a secondary access for trucks. But it's also would continue to be used as the primary driveway for the house, and so this easement then would ensure continued shared access for both going forward. Apart from that, nothing major brought up in the review process, other than noting from Health Department that they need to have the existing septic system inspected at the time of transfer. And then it is within the West Burlington 2-mile review area, but they have already approved it, so, and no major issues there, so I recommend approval of Phi subdivision.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Sarah?
Tom Broker.
Yes.
Shane McCampbell.
Yes.
Jim Carrey.
Yes. Jared will sign the rest of these here.
Sure.
After the meeting before our work session.
Okay.
Thank you. We have a personnel action for the sheriff's department. For Dave McGee, and I think you just explained that to us, Sheriff, thank you. It, moving from 8-hour Monday through Friday to 10-hour days. effective June the 2nd, 2025.
Motion to approve. Second.
Sarah?
Shane McCampbell,
Yes.
Tom Broker.
Yes.
Jim Carrey.
Yes. Now we have the reports. We had a Veterans Fair monthly report for May 2025. These reports will be in the auditor's office for your review at your own discretion. And we have the minutes for the May 27th, 2025 meeting.
Motion to approve. Second.
Sarah?
Tom Broker,
Yes.
Shane McCampbell.
Yes.
Jim Carrey.
Yes. Is there any other business?
I've mentioned a couple of times in here, Midwest Realty Company, Ryan Nagrocki's been in here, and they were wanting the county a local match to make themselves eligible for a workforce housing grant from the state, and we all agreed, none of us were comfortable, right, that we don't have a TIF or tax abatement programs. None of us were comfortable writing a check to a private company. But I mentioned that they also took cash equivalents, and that I was kind of looking with the, to see what we could do there that might benefit both the opportunity to get the grant and the county. And so there's no Gravel County access road, about 500 or 600 miles long, that goes past those sundown apartments, and then it dies there and goes into there's a cemetery there. Anyway, so it's the road's in poor condition. It has poor drainage. There's not much we can do with it, and it's a pain in the butt to drive a road grader in to service it. Paving the road would cost the county somewhere in $130,000 range. I spoke to Mr. Nagrocki at Midwest Realty and asked him if he would be willing to pay the cost of the road in excess of the $56,000 match. They need $1,000 for each apartment. And he agreed to that proposal. So that means Midwest Realty becomes eligible for a $600,000-700,000 grant to fix up the apartments. The state gets the workforce housing it wants. The county gets a blighted area with the crime problem cleaned up. The sheriff and county attorney have one less problem area to focus on. The county tax base increases, and the county gets a $130,000 road for $56,000. I think that's a win-win, and you guys can think about it, but we'll have the paperwork on next week's agenda.
So let me get this straight, and so this has to be contingent that he gets the,
It has to be continued, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, we don't do it until he gets the
until
grant.
he gets the grant,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Well, it is kind of a win-win situation.
I thought so.
There definitely needs some work out there. That'll really help you out too, won't it, Sheriff?
Well, I think it's already getting the help it needs, just to not allow the kind of tenants that had been there previously, but improving them and making them a better representation of Moines County, I think, is something that we could all win from. Increases tax base, get the right kind of tenants in there, and it's the kind of thing our community would like to see.
And for the road department, do you have anything to say about that, Becky?
I've been talking to Brian, that's where
taking care
those
of it.
numbers came from.
Yeah.
Well, she figured them out for Brian.
Well, I'm not saying Brian did the actual calculations.
That's Devin's department.
I'm certainly not claiming that.
Okay, well, thank you.
Right. That's all I had.
Okay. Future agenda items. I have none at this point. You, Shane?
No, just what we already got going.
Committee reports.
I have none.
I had none.
I have none. Okay. Public input. Public, we'll give you 2 minutes to call in at 319-753-8203 extension 4, or email board@dmcounty.com. That's 319-753-8203 extension 4, or board@dmcounty.com. We'll give you 2 minutes. Meanwhile, anybody in the audience have anything to say?
Just a question about the deal with two questions about Midwest Realty, that project. Those are competitive, tax credits, right? Like,
They're applying for the grant.
Right.
And part of one of the requirements, is that we talked about it in here.
right,
is they
no,
get
but
tax
they're
waivers.
competitive, like he may or may not
Oh,
get
yeah,
it.
yeah, and
Yeah.
I don't think this assures that he gets it by
Right,
any stretch of
right.
the imagination.
And that's Memorial Park Road, then?
No, it's,
It's off of
115.
115th Street?
Avenue off of Memorial.
yeah, it's out there, just, you turn left off Memorial Park Road if you're heading
So it's the
north,
one that goes right,
right toward alongside the cemetery.
yeah,
The
no, okay,
Apostolic Church.
okay,
Yeah.
okay. Okay, thanks.
Yes.
Hi, Cindy Newberry. I emailed Tom that we have a stack of petitions for a moratorium on the wind. Would you like these now?
If you want to bring them up, that's fine. You can tell us how many signatures you've got.
No, there's over 500 so far.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
These will also be in the auditor's office for reviewing at your own discretion. Okay, well, I think the 2 minutes are up, so with an aye, we'll be out of here.
Bye.
Right. We're gonna take a little break here so we can sign these papers, and then we will have a work session just shortly here on the wind farm. Okay. Welcome, everybody. We're here for work session as supervisors. This is gonna be so we can talk. We can't talk outside of, unless there's three of us. And, so we need to do some talking ourselves. We'll take the minimum, stuff from the audience, let's put it that way. It's not an arguing session or anything like that, we just need to get together. And I think, I've got some, have you got factors you wanna go through?
Yeah, I would. I've
Okay.
mentioned a couple things that I touched on. First, I'd like to thank everyone who took, shared their thoughts, ideas, information, passion, including those who didn't speak, but provided moral support for those who did. I was touched by the moving and thoughtful comments. Your civility and respect for each other made me proud to be a citizen of Des Moines County. You've all been great. I know this is an emotional issue, and I know the board's sympathetic to the current concerns of both sides. It's our responsibility to balance and prioritize those concerns on both sides of the issue. I've thought about this over the last few months and a whole lot over the last few weeks. I'm human with more than my share of opinions, but my opinions need to be secondary to my responsibilities as Des Moines County Supervisor. And I thought the board needed a framework to deal with this issue, so you've heard me say that I reached out to an attorney. And an attorney that was experienced in commercial wind energy issues. I learned that local legislation must comply with the constitutional requirements of equal protection, due process, and the takings clause of the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution when property rights are involved. That reminded me of the fact that at the beginning of each term, elected officials, including county supervisors, raise their right hand and swear an oath to support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the state of Iowa. The takings clause in the Fifth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution prohibits the taking of private property for public use without just compensation. The takings clause also prohibits legislation that removes property rights through regulation, which is known as a regulatory taking. A county does have the power to impose limited regulations which are subject to those constitutional requirements and to the rational basis test. The rational basis test has two components. The first component is the requirement for a legitimate government interest. Des Moines County has a legitimate government interest in both the property rights of participating landowners and public safety. The second component is that the regulations are rationally related to that legitimate interest. Regulations set to constitute an effective ban or to indirectly prohibit wind installations are unlikely to pass a rational basis test. Finally, any regulation that lacks a rational basis and affects property rights is automatically a taking in violation of the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution. Want to add it, and you guys got copies of the lawyer's opinions. He had three problems. He said our current ordinance, he said, looks okay with three caveats. The first was the fee, and somebody pointed it out, I believe, the other night when we were upstairs in the courtroom. Somebody got up and said, if this figured the way you got it here, it'd cost $300,000 to apply for that. He said, who gets that money? I don't think we'd ever. I think it came probably copied from another county. But if you look at it, he said that would not pass a rational basis test. He said the people you're going to have them looking at it aren't going to make anywhere $300,000 a year, and it's not going to take them anywhere near a year to do that. So he said that there's no rational basis for that. The other one is the bond. We multiply it times 3 to, we were concerned about inflation or whatever. He said, that inflation should be in your estimate. He said, there's not a rational basis to multiply that by 3, or at that high a number. And the third was several times in the ordinance, it refers to the satisfaction of the Des Moines County Board of Supervisors. The three people up here thought that was a great cause. Apparently, it's not exactly a model of clarity. There's a chance that could be misinterpreted, or who knows what a Board of Supervisors like. So he recommended that anywhere that we had that in there, we would quantify it or describe it a little more accurately. And I think those probably, I learned a lot. So, as you guys, well, I can go through, so I've made some notes on those 16 requests. If I can go through that, or you guys can address it.
Well, excuse me. That would be great, but I've got about 4 things that I am real pretty adamant on. And one is a fire suppression system to do with lightning. And then I think Brian Drew brought up the fact that there is lighting on top of there to stop the light flickering for aircraft control.
Can he explain how that
Yeah.
works? What that, okay.
I'm only an expert because I've sat through enough of these hearings, and in Clinton County, that was one that was discussed pretty thoroughly. I believe, and I just switched phones, so I don't have the system, but I think it's an ADLS, like an advanced detection lighting system or something, but it only comes on when it detects aircraft in the area, so that you don't see that all night, is what they were talking about, and one of the things that they were wanting to see. The problem is, again, through their experiences, you can't require it in your ordinance because it's something that the FAA has to approve. So you can, I guess, encourage or ask the developer to apply for that and have the FAA approve it, but they act like you couldn't just make it contingent on approval of the ordinance to have that. And the other thing, not to jump off subject, was the fire suppression. I know talking with some of the other developers, they're very nervous about putting their workers up in there if something malfunctioned with that system, because fire suppression system takes oxygen out of the room like that, right? That's how it keeps it fired. If one of their maintenance guys or females was up there and it malfunctioned for some reason, they're like, it's not worth the risk. We're not putting one of our employees at risk with one of those, and so just food for thought. So.
Thank you.
I said we go through the 16.
Okay, well, and people have asked for a moratorium. A moratorium should last only as long as necessary for a governmental body to study, research, and draft legislation governing the specific activity. The rational basis for a moratorium is that government officials need to study a problem before passing legislation. A moratorium that lasts longer than the time necessary to do so lacks a rational basis, and a 2-year moratorium becomes just a delaying tactic and probably a bad faith action. I personally don't think any moratorium is necessary. We aren't creating an ordinance from scratch. We already have the framework and boilerplate of an existing ordinance. I think 2-3 work sessions can get us the changes we need. Add 3 public hearings to amend the ordinance, and we can be done in a couple months, 3 months at most. Add the fact that the developer stated in a public meeting in this room that they are not planning to apply for a permit for a year. The developer also stated in the same meeting that they fully support reopening the ordinance to clarify developer responsibilities and to address community concerns. I think their failure to act accordingly would be bad faith on their account, so I don't think a moratorium is anything we need. Besides, I think a shorter schedule will keep everybody focused.
Yeah, I was already, after I talked to the lawyer about that, he advised that that probably isn't the way we should go, so I'm gonna go with the lawyer on that.
I agree 100%.
Okay. And if we go through those, and that was the first thing on those 16 recommendations. And number 2 is extend the setbacks to a mile from a non-participating property line, I think that's probably an effective ban. I want to discuss setbacks. That's what I've been talking about, but I don't think that's in the ballpark. And 2 miles from incorporated and unincorporated towns, other towns should be given the same benefits as Burlington by regulating the development within 2 miles of the town limits. Incorporated towns do have that right if they want to zone 2 miles, then the county would have the right to zone that 2 miles. But you want to be careful what you wish for, because I don't know how many people that live within 2 miles of that town want the city council or the board of the supervisors zoning the land they live on. And you can define non-incorporated town however you want, but I don't know how, you don't have a city council, you don't have a official city limits, it's, that's.
So I think you're spot on with what you're saying as far as the 2 mile zone. Traditionally, cities have the right to zone within the 2 mile zone of a municipality, so you're spot on. And if they wanted to lobby the various municipalities, do that, that's a good idea. But as far as what we've done, we just have our zoning the 2 mile radius of Burlington simply because that was a deal that was made 20 years ago?
Almost 30 at this point.
Almost 30.
About 25.
Almost 30 years ago that the city of Burlington wanted to zone within their 2 mile radius, and the supervisors at that time were like, hey, that's our playground, come on. And so this was the fact that we have a zoning ordinance around the 2 miles of Burlington. It's just a function of a deal that was made 25 years ago. It's pretty unique. But generally, zoning within the 2 mile radius of a municipality would come from that municipality. So now, as far as Pleasant Grove, where it's unincorporated, it's unincorporated. That's just a decision they made. Yeah. So if we wanted to zone, we'd have to zone, I think, and this is your expertise, definitely. But if we wanted to zone beyond what we have and not have it be spot zoning, we would have to zone in the entire county truly, and that's at least historically, that's been something you three have not wanted to do. I know that. So.
I think the recent board is anytime they talked about that, and it was before me, it filled the room up with people that didn't want zoning.
Yeah, so.
Zoning takes the right away from the landowner itself when you start zoning stuff. I can say you wanna build a new garage, no, you don't need a new garage, I'm not gonna let you. I don't like anybody telling me what I can do with my property, and you sure people out here don't want them telling what you can do with your property.
Anyway, the third one turbine per parcel, currently can have one every 715 feet. I assume, or I'm sure that'll be discussed during the setbacks, and we're gonna have a discussion about setbacks. The no shadow flicker on non-participating property. I think that's an effective ban. Height restriction. Maybe that gets discussed during the setbacks. A property value guarantee, which I assume is an estimate of how much your property's increased or decreased in value, and the developer would be responsible for that. That's pretty subjective. I'm not gonna go there. And then add the CSR standard, the corn suitability rating to preserve prime barn ground, no turbines on 65 or higher CSR. We've had that discussion, that exact discussion, in this board several times. And none of us are in favor of telling a farmer that because you have your ground's this good, this is all you can do with it. That screams takings to me. That's if he wants to use it to farm or build a mobile home park on it, whatever. add sound guidelines to the ordinance. I'm more than happy to discuss that. To use an escrow account in place of bonds as security for availability of funds. Escrow accounts are typically used to protect the interests of both parties in a transaction by holding funds or assets until all conditions are met. Long-term liability or performance responsibility are typically covered by liability insurance or surety bonds. The excessive costs of funding escrow accounts look a lot like an attempt to indirectly prohibit wind turbines, not to mention that forcing wind developers to handle their liabilities with escrow accounts while allowing others the ability to use insurance or bonding for the same purpose would probably bring the equal protection clause into the discussion. 11, company must provide an unredacted copy of the safety manual for the turbine to be used. I don't think that's an unreasonable request. Lightning protection systems on all turbines, that's, if it's available, I would think we want that. That's something I would want in the ordinance.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Same for the fire suppression systems.
I'd like to
With
know a little bit
what
more
Moines
about
said.
that fire
Yeah.
suppression system, since you said it takes all that oxygen out of somebody up there, they can't get away.
I can share more information. Some of them do work like that, but they don't all.
Can we have your name?
My name is Evie, Evie Soul. I'm the developer with AES, it's
Okay.
developing the wind farm. So some of them do work that way, as Brian described. Others have sensors in areas that are more prone to fires that detect both heat and smoke. And when one of the sensors is tripped, there's aerosol extinguishers inside the hub at the top of the tower that will release and put out the fire before it's even started. Usually within like 15 seconds, it's out. So there's two options. for the
Without
system.
removing the oxygen.
Correct, yeah, so it's safer for the technicians.
Yeah, but I like-
What's the name of that one? It's got two different terminologies for them.
I don't think there's a separate or established name for it. Each manufacturer, each turbine manufacturer has its own system and their own way that it works.
Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, but I'm all in on fire suppression.
You got fire suppression.
Yeah, I'm all in on the other one too.
Lightning.
Lightning, yep, I'm all in on that.
And I'm not quite sure what include an act of God section to require reimbursement for loss of non-participating problem. New York hayfield example.
I think with this, one thing we can do, which is something we've kind of already touched on and I believe we want to do, is require that they have liability insurance, not only for decommissioning, but liability insurance for, just like you would in a car, right?
Yep.
For accidents that happen to the neighbors. And if they want to put that insurance also covers an act of God, I mean, I'm not an actuary, but I think that's something they can put into a policy in some fashion, that, or an umbrella insurance that covers everything. I mean, I'm sure there's an insurance person that can figure that out. There's gotta be a way to insure for all of that. Cause that New York thing, I think what they're saying is there was something that wasn't covered because it's determined an act of God. But it's just gotta be the insurance has to cover all liability.
Maybe we have an answer in the back.
I guess I would just ask, if you go that route, would you, is that covering non-participating properties? Because typically if you have an
We
insurance
would
policy.
cover any damage caused by the installation. I had a steel erection company, and before I would be allowed on the job, depending on who you're working for, they would have certain requirements. And back in the 1990s, I was required to have a $10 million umbrella and maybe 2 to 5 million on the base policy, and so yeah, that's and that would cover if whatever my employees or what we did caused.
Okay, so the New York hay example, I'd be happy to send you some articles about that. a turbine went down and it went onto a non-participating farmer who had a hayfield. That hayfield is now not usable as a field any longer because of that destruction. And so is there compensation, and what is that compensation? Because you have topsoil damage and all of those kinds of things, so it's a little different than other types of property, like a building, you can reconstruct. A car, if it's liability insurance, you can replace the car. What is the, is there specifications just saying you have to cover that? That's not something then is known how that's gonna cover until the accident happens or the act of God takes place. So I think we're also seeing that in Mechanicsville and some other areas where damage is done, and then even when a company goes out of business or goes bankrupt, those kinds of things. So there's a lot more parameters. I get what you're saying is that that's what it's intended for, but if an accident happens and there isn't, either that wasn't covered, the bond had expired, we saw that in Louisa County recently, the bond expired and they couldn't find out who owned the solar field for about 3 months, there was a lapse. So there are some things out there that happen that aren't necessarily planned for, and then that non-participating landowner would basically be on their own. So I think those are all great ideas, but how do you make sure that that is gonna cover something and have other, I guess, mechanisms in place to cover the what ifs?
Excuse me, I believe originally in the current, we've got, for whatever that, whether it's 3 times, we have a bond that covers not only all the decommissioning and restoring the land to pre-installation condition, but it also covers that it's supposed to pay for liability insurance like that. And it expires every 3 years, so 2.5 years, they come to the board and they say, we want to stay in business. So then they have 3 months to come up with a new bond. If they don't come up with a new bond, the old bond's in default. And to cover the decommissioning and those things. So and we'll look at that again.
Okay, well, and then, like I said, if a project changes hands, which is what happened in Louisa County,
It
then
doesn't
nobody
change hands
even.
without these requirements.
Okay, but those things do happen, so I'm just
Yeah.
asking you to think beyond what we think should happen, and look at cases where other things have happened. We also in Henry County had the bonds, the person that does bonds came in and spoke to our supervisors, about bond versus escrow. And she had some very interesting things to say. I'd be happy to forward that video to you too, so.
We're getting and where we're gonna be answering questions, and we're here to talk among ourselves and find out what's the best.
But we can also get information if we
Yeah.
want. I think there's a gentleman there that wants to talk, but
All right. Okay,
When we talk about insurance, this is my first time in front of the supervisors. I'm Charlie Tonkinson, from Yarmouth,
Yeah.
soon to be known as Des Moines County's new red light district. Anyway, we're talking about 2 kinds of insurance. We're talking about a liability insurance, and then we're talking about personal injury and death. So when you talk about insurance, are we have all this in one big package? That's what we have to be careful with.
that'll be something we'll have to
Okay.
deal with our
Well,
insurance
I'll
company.
look at that and see.
So who would set that up, as far as the insurance goes? How would that work out?
So, we really focused on the decommissioning. I mean, we talked about that a lot, as you all know.
Right.
And I think what we should be able to do is require that they have that same bond, same policy, able to cover everything. Now, he's right when he's saying if you get into liability, you do need more, right? And so maybe that 3 times cost decommissioning, maybe that then justifies that amount, I don't know. We have to see somebody come in with numbers on what it costs to insure, maybe we do, I mean, but I think that we were thinking decommission, we were really concerned with
Right.
how are we gonna preserve the land? We don't wanna have like we have, you know, old gas stations spotted all around the country. We don't wanna have old windmills spotted all, and that was really the big concern we addressed. So some of these functional things as far as accident liability, I think if we incorporate that in there as well, I mean, there's gotta be an insurance company for it somewhere. That insurance agent may not be in the room, right, but there's somebody that does that. And talk to them and see what that is. But I do believe it makes sense that they say, hey, and Tom's spot on when he's saying, we wanna have that be part of our process with the 2.5-year timeline, 2.5 years, show us at 3 months, and if not, then we just go straight into decommissioning. So I think that we wanna make sure that there's liability insurance and then have it tied into that same timeline. And that covers all of that.
What's your next?
They got, next is the, including drainage systems and road use agreement. Moines County has a great secondary roads department and a great county engineer. And when we passed the original ordinance, he was concerned about the roads being torn up and what provisions were being made to whatever modifications had to be made to the road, that the developer would pick that up, restoring those roads to their original condition. And as far as the actual draining systems, Brian wasn't able to make it today, but I would have confidence in him looking at something like that and saying, this works or this doesn't work. And
And he was well aware that these gonna be 100-ton cranes too.
oh yeah,
so
we talked about that.
talk about that.
And the complaint resolution section, that's a pretty specific regulation that I've not seen apply to other enterprises. And I personally don't think that's probably there's a rational basis for that.
Tom, I apologize, what was the last one again, I didn't catch it.
The complaint resolution section added to the ordinance, I said, that seems to be a pretty specific regulation, and I know there's other enterprises that regularly get complaints, and I don't think they're subject to a complaint resolution section. I just think that's superfluous, probably not a rational basis.
I mean, ultimately, the ordinance has standards in place for setbacks and other requirements that are addressed at the development stage. And once it's developed, if things aren't installed as was intended, as was presented to the board, then there's a obvious connection there that could be considered a violation, that's a matter that was not consistent with what had been approved. So that if something is clearly connected to an ordinance regulation and a minimum standard, we have the wherewithal to address that if things are not built according to standard. So it's like, what apart from that, about just day-to-day complaints, as long as it was built in accordance with the standards of the ordinance, then it gets tricky as to how do you justify them beyond that.
Some people call the board of supervisors. Gentleman over here, did you have something regarding that? Go ahead.
Can I speak a little bit about it? I got here late, I'm sorry. I want to talk about safety. The DOT will lower safety belts, they're concerned about my safety. And it seems as if at this point in time, with this 1,800-foot setback, Des Moines County's not too concerned about my safety. When the industry standard in the windmill industry is 1 meter, most people don't know, that's 3,280 feet, 10 inches and 5/64. Okay, roughly, let me round it to 3,300 feet. If we double the 1,800, we're at 36. So in other words, a worker in their tower is valued twice as much as Des Moines County, to twice the distance.
Is this from the Nordex manual?
What am I, chopped liver here? I mean, you're talking to about the citizens, like stepchildren. These setbacks have to be moved, I would say the full mile that we originally asked for, with the industry standards being the 3,280 feet. And the probability of getting hit when the worker gets to his 1,800 safe feet that the Des Moines County gets, the next 1,800 feet is not gonna be so dangerous. So you're putting the families of the people in Yarmouth and Pleasant Road and all the surrounding area, you're putting them in more danger. Now, we wanna be treated like regular citizens of this county. This needs to be changed, it's not even.
We're familiar with that Nordex standard, we talked about it before.
I was here late, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
well, I mean,
Yeah, that's one thing. And then, what are we gonna make the line, my house or the property line?
all those, not to interrupt you, but all those things are gonna be discussed when we get to setbacks.
Okay, let's talk about the setbacks.
That's,
Okay, from a home rather than a property line.
we're gonna talk about that when we get to setbacks.
We're not that far yet.
We're just going through these 16 requests right now. We got a list of 16 requests. So we've gone through each one of those. So there will be a separate discussion on the setbacks.
Okay, because, in other words, if we go to my house, that's one thing, and I have a right to be safe on my property. And that's my property line. In other words, I'm safe here, but I can't walk over there, because I'm not safe. That's not too hard to follow. And another thing that no one has talked about is the Trojan horse.
We'll get to all that stuff later, Charlie.
Next meeting?
No, maybe next meeting, maybe this meeting, but
Oh,
right now, we're trying to discuss ourselves.
Okay, Jim.
Yeah,
I got one more thing, is Homeland Security. I wanna talk about that.
we'll do that after a while. Later.
Later.
Yeah, no.
Okay, no, well, that was that was one of my thoughts on those 16 items.
You wanna do it again?
Well, I agree with a few of them. Like I said, my main concern, when we get into the setbacks, I'd like that setback a little bit more.
And what about height restriction?
The manual is, different companies got different manuals.
Incidentally, Evie, is there any problem with providing manual for the safety manual for whatever brand of turbine it is?
I don't know if there will be a problem. A lot of the materials we get from the turbine manufacturer are considered confidential. We're not supposed to share them, but I also think it's reasonable for you all to know the safety.
Could you speak
You
up a little bit?
would have to share them with your employees.
Yeah, we'd have to share them with the employees, and I think it's reasonable for the county to know our safety protocol and what we're required to do and the technical requirements, so I don't know firmly like what the answer to that question is, but I don't think there's any issue with the intent behind the request.
Maybe you can check and see if that's a problem.
Okay, while we're kind of addressing issues, and I know you've already brought this up, Tom, the permit pricing, and I know we need to kind of sort out, and this is, how we're gonna define a permit. Is it a contiguous property? Is it all of the sites in the county as a whole? And me and Jared have different views, and so I don't know if we need to box this out in front of the whole world, but it does matter, I think, as we're talking about a permit, whether it's one parcel, one permit, whether it's one permit for the whole county, one permit for contiguous leases. I mean, we need to sort that out.
I think the ratio of how we're calculating the fee, that's definitely up to interpretation. I mean, if we're talking about a single wind farm that involves 8 different property owners, but it's one developer, then it doesn't make sense to have to fill out a permit 8 different times if it's just for the same project. But so it would be this, the developer would fill out a permit for the whole project. It's just how are we evaluating and ultimately the fee is based on the staff time and consultants as needed to review those technical documents associated with the permit. So it does, and it is tricky because there are different communities out there have taken different paths on this, and there really is no set strategy that everyone agrees upon. But ultimately, it should be based on how best do we think can we approximate what that cost is going to be and ensure that that is fully covered by that fee, and it would be based on anything from number of properties, number of wind turbines, the total megawatt energy generation, and part of the difficulty when we were first addressing this was that the different spatial layout of a solar farm versus a wind farm, whereas for solar, maybe acreage makes more sense just because the panels cover a large area, whereas for a wind turbine, it's just a series of points. So we're definitely open to a further discussion on that. Maybe it involves a different ratio for one type of facility versus another. But I will note one thing going forward. So just for some background here, we did regional planning. We did work with Lee County over the last year on because they were in a similar situation where they didn't have any ordinance to regulate alternative energy projects, and there were concerns among the public. And so through that process of working with the supervisors, they had some public feedback sessions there as well. There were a number of things that we decided to modify from what was originally proposed for Des Moines County, and one of those would be just for the sake of ease of administration in the future, to remove the actual specific fee amounts from the ordinance and have those set by resolution, so that you wouldn't have to go back and amend the ordinance every time if we ever feel in the future that we need to modify that based on inflation or whatever other factors. So that is going to be an important point to address, but we feel that it would be best to, even though the ordinance specifies that if the fees are involved, that specific rate be calculated and set through resolution. So.
The attorney's got here, he said the legitimate government interest is in recouping costs for the time of government employees evaluating the application.
Right.
The number of turbines and even the megawatts to be produced are good measures for that fee because they are key to the portion of the project that needs review. An application fee based on unused acres may not have the same rational relationship. So,
Right, and what I'm saying is I think we're talking about two separate things. We need to address the permit fee based on what Updraft wrote, and you're spot on. What I'm saying is we also need to make sure we get language in there, and then really before we address the fee, because that's gonna, kind of guide us, of what does a permit look like? Is it one permit per parcel? Is it one permit per leaseholder? Is it one permit per contiguous lease properties? So say you might have property owners A, B, C, and D, but one company owns the lease to all of those parcels. And what happens if we have, the death of the salesman, so the one house that's not involved in the middle of a parcel, does that then make those all separate? We need to sort that out. What is a permit? Because we wouldn't let somebody do a subdivision if they don't own all of the property in that subdivision. And so to treat it like it's a subdivision, we just need to address, you guys are the decision makers, but we need to address that and have language to say what that looks like. Is it one permit per parcel? one permit for the whole county, and that will change the way we draft the rest of the considerations throughout the process. I think that's gonna have to be addressed almost as an initial construct.
Yeah,
I don't need to read it right now, but I mean, I think the intent would be one permit per development.
I mean, and if it were to be expanded in the future, then they'd have a separate permit for that expansion.
Yeah.
But then that's not per parcel, I mean, and that's what Jared's saying, is one per development, but if they don't own a lease right to every
They have to submit
contiguous.
the leases, all of the leases that they have within that development, so.
Yeah.
I guess I don't understand why you would need a permit per parcel.
Can you help us out on that, what?
I guess I'm having a hard time understanding why you wouldn't have a permit per turbine. Because, if you have a subdivision, for example, you don't get one building permit for the whole subdivision.
Those are two separate things.
Right, but I'm just saying that if you, a company could say they're gonna have 30 turbines and then they end up having 50. So I think it needs to be based on the number of turbines.
Well, the permit would apply to the initial 30 turbines. If they wanted to add additional in the future, they'd have to have a separate permit for that.
Right, but I think you call it a siting permit in your ordinance, correct?
Right.
And so a siting permit to me means it's related to the site, which is the turbine itself.
Can I add something here? I have never seen a wind project be permitted on a parcel by parcel basis or a turbine by turbine basis. I've only ever seen it on a development wide, one permit for the one project basis. If you wanted to do it on a parcel by parcel basis or a turbine by turbine basis, I guess that could happen, but that would be, from my perspective, a huge administrative overload because every permit would come with duplicative information because the permit application requires us to submit a ton of information about the project as a whole. And so every individual permit would come with that information that would need to be reviewed individually.
We should be looking at it as a holistic project and not.
Right, and I get the idea of using the fee rate based on the number of turbines, because then we're basing that staff time and review on the size of the project proportionally, so it's ultimately, it's functioning the same way, but from the logistical standpoint, we are talking about an entire facility where the same characteristics are gonna apply to all of those turbines, and then the same setbacks and other standards will apply to all.
And that's what I'm saying we need to coordinate and decide, Jared, is, are we gonna require a lease then, a contiguous lease for a permit? Because if we don't, then that's not the same parameters, because within that one project, you're gonna have holes where you have separate property rate interest, because they don't have that contiguous, so there's gonna be different considerations throughout that permit.
Typically, those holes would be considered like a non-participating property, and so the restrictions for them would be incorporated into the design, which is included with the permit application. So, like if we apply for 30 turbines, those 30 turbine locations will be included with the permit application, and they can't change without some sort of amendment to the permit. If we wanted to put 50 turbines up instead of 30, we'd have to come back and get another permit for those. So when we submit the permit application, it would include all the details and the information that shows we're compliant with the protections for non-participating property, if they may be islanded or on the outside of the project.
So, and those are all things we would need to, if we're gonna allow for this permitting scheme, like this mass permitting scheme, those are all things I think we need to, and I'm not saying why, but if that's what we wanna do, then I think we need to address that inside our ordinance, so that way we know we're protecting those individuals during the permitting process, and protecting, and there's nothing else we do in the county where we allow for these permits of areas where you have non-participating property owners. It just seems unusual to me. It is unusual. It's just, I mean, we have to consider several new things if we're gonna do that.
I think the key part there is just defining what a participating versus non-participating property is, and that is something we previously spent a lot of time on, and it's a similar thing with Lee County, is just making it clear what standards apply to each, and I think that what we have now is definitely a good framework for that. It's just, maybe there are opportunities for adjusting the verbiage here or there, but I think the general system is, I think what we have.
Now, you just got my heart rate accelerating, because I am one parcel in a subdivision that did not sign up for this, and all the other parcels did. So that just leaves me just in the dirt.
What's your name?
Cheryl Murray,
Cheryl Murray?
yeah, I'm in the Giddings subdivision. And there's 2 landowners that own all the other parcels, and I have, or all the other lots in that subdivision, I have 1 lot. And they both signed, and they surround me, so I'm gonna be in the dirt. I won't be protected at all.
No, we have, there's guidelines in for participating and non-participating properties, so they would have to meet the requirements still of the
Right.
non-participating properties, so there's certain
Yeah.
setbacks and.
They're still not very, I don't agree with everything
And
that's
that's,
going on
no,
right
that's
now.
fine, but I'm just saying, it's set up so that there are standards for properties that are non-participating in the development.
Yeah, we'll see how it all ends up.
So if it does, like for the setbacks, if there isn't enough room based on the minimum setback in the ordinance, then we would not allow, at least without a waiver of the non-participating property owner, if you're not comfortable with that, you don't sign the waiver, and then that, if it doesn't comply with that setback, it wouldn't be allowed at that location.
What's wrong with them?
That sounds good to me.
That's what,
Are we gonna protect the citizens of Des Moines County?
Our goal, as I've sort of gone through, is that what regulations we're allowed to make have to respect the due process, equal protection, and Fifth Amendment takings clause, specifically regulatory takings. So we have to meet those. We will be protected. We have an interest in the private property rights of the landowners, and we have an interest in public safety. That's part of the legitimate government interest. And we're trying to apply that here. So we're prioritizing and balancing competing interests. So it's not black and white.
You know, there's been a lot of work going into this. Still a lot of work to do.
What's Lee County setback? I can't find it.
County setback is
Yeah.
1,000 foot, it's on,
They have graphs, so it's a different setback for every different.
it's a chart, so
Chart, yeah.
for non-participating dwellings, it's 1,600 feet
That's
for
Lee
Lee County.
County.
Lee County,
That's
yes.
Lee County, yeah.
Des Moines County, it's 1,800.
but we put a lot of work again on something that should be handled up at the state level. You know, they put it on the supervisors all over the county. Just like, let me go back to the ATV and UTV ordinance. Des Moines said, it's up to the county, it's up to the county. We worked hard on that ATV and UTV ordinance. We had it in there. Other counties took our lead and followed through. All of a sudden, the state comes up and says, your ordinance is no good. This is what the state's gonna do. Our ordinance went in the trash can. This is where this should be. This should be up in Des Moines.
No.
Des Moines already considered one that had
Yeah,
1.1 times the height of the turbine. They have, their setbacks were quite a bit lower, less than ours.
I'm saying it should be statewide up in the Senate, in the House. That's where it should be.
Well, depends on whether you think it's local control or not. Mr. Newberry?
Just real quick, information, Henry County's is 1 kilometer, and they're about gonna do the 3rd reading here pretty soon, so just information. That's 3,280 feet.
80 feet and some odd inches.
10 inches and 46 tons or something. No, thank you.
And so where are we? And I agree with you, that you should have one permit for the installation. You can't have a permit for every parcel.
Just for some
I
additional.
don't wanna,
What?
I don't know that I wanna review a permit for
Yeah,
everyone, but I don't know if it,
I
makes sense either, so.
What you, essentially, you're reviewing, you know, you've got a map of participating and non-participating parcels. You've got locations of turbines or other, I assume there's some off buildings, you know, a maintenance building and that sort of thing. You've got a map of that, and you can, whatever, you know, where the location of those matches the ordinance.
Show the distance and setbacks from everything.
Proper setbacks that the ordinance will state, and look at it that way, and it would be one permit. Or maybe I'm missing something, apparently I am.
I think that's the intent.
There's gonna be a lot of documentation associated with it, but
Yeah,
that's
that's
the key, of having a map that
We've
shows.
got hundreds of parcels.
Right.
If they don't meet our guidelines, then we would have to ask for additional information.
So then do you propose doing the fee by the project or by the turbine?
I don't know.
Mr.
This
I forget
part of
your
this
name,
part
is
of
it
this goes
Trent?
over my head.
Trent,
But the legal
what is your
opinion I
thought
had
on that?
said that, you know, that by the turbine or the megawatt.
So it's basically a ratio, how many turbines are there times a certain rate, and so it's a larger fee based on, if it's a larger project, gets a larger fee than a smaller project. So it's just based on the overall size, because a larger project is gonna require more review time based on the larger amount of infrastructure overall that's going in, and you have to make sure that each one of those turbines and any other associated infrastructure meets those setback standards.
And the quote on this review says the number of turbines and even the megawatts to be produced are good measures for that fee, because they are key to the portion of the project that needs review.
Mr. Newberry?
How many turbines are there going to be?
I think that's, you know, when we're looking at this from a legal perspective, we have to be careful, you guys have to be careful, that we're not trying to make regulations based on any specific project. We're not allowed to do that, we know that. So, I don't know, I mean, I don't know if there's one company or 10 companies or no companies that, I mean, AES is sitting in the room, so they're obviously interested. But other than that, we don't know, and so what the supervisors have to do is make decisions based on what's in the best interest of the citizens of Des Moines County, not just today, given, you know, kind of, you know, what's right in front of us, but what's gonna be the best going forward. So, one, we don't know the answer to that question, but two, that's one they really can't answer, because they're not supposed to be, and I don't believe they are, looking at regulation based on one specific project.
So would you recommend doing the fee structure based on the number of turbines then?
Well, what we have right now is based on acreage, and,
Total acreage.
yeah, total acreage, and, you know, that may not be tied to the amount of work that goes into creating the permit. There's pretty clear case law that permitting schemes are not allowed to be like a tax, essentially. They're supposed to be tied to the amount and the actual cost that the governing body has in administering that permit and processing that permit. And so, what Updegraff, which is the attorney that kind of handles these things out of Des Moines, he's saying, based on his expertise, he doesn't believe that per acre is a good parameter to use because it's not tied to the amount of work that needs to be done. It's really more tied to, and I think Jared said it right there, the number of turbines, because if within a permit, they're looking at the number of turbines or the number of, you know, the acreage that's maybe non-participating, something that we're actually having to look at, and the number of roads involved, because Carter's gonna go in and he's gonna have to look at how many roads, how much work, but it has to be tied to the actual administrative costs that we have.
So that's why a per turbine fee structure would make sense, right?
That's one thing that could be done, yes.
I mean,
So
towns
it's-
could be, you could have two different companies and one has leases for 5,000 acres and one has leases for 20,000 acres, but they're both gonna have 10 turbines. So it doesn't make sense to charge them on the acreage. It would make more sense to do it on the turbine.
Is Updegraff the attorney you've consulted?
Yes, and I don't know if that's how you say it.
Is Updegraff the attorney you have consulted?
That's correct.
Yes. So, but I think today, are we just wanting to kind of decide, you know, what our targets are?
Yeah, and I think that we need to look at a different way that base that fee on, whether it's turbine sounds like maybe a pretty good way to me to just, you know, to estimate the time that will go into that review rather than acres, or probably a little more handy than just megawatts, because what little bit I know about it is turbines come in different megawatt sizes. The bigger turbines produce more electricity than the smaller ones, so it would,
And then at the same time, we gotta consider, because the county has also adopted a solar ordinance, that's part of the discrepancy there, is that solar generally covers a larger area of land with the installations, and so if we're gonna be changing the standard for wind turbines, then we need to also be careful about how's that gonna affect solar, and make sure we have a comparative fee structure that's consistent for both.
That's Lee County, we're separate.
I'm confident you.
That's
we
Lee
have
County or
separate-
Henry
we
County,
have
we're
separate-
separate.
We have separate.
Right.
Yeah, that I will count on your expertise to check that
But even if it's everything, just in either case, he's saying we need to be consistent
Right.
with our
Yeah, no, I agree.
fee structures. Okay.
About setbacks and height restrictions.
Setback right now, 18, I think it's 1,800.
That's from non-height dwellings, and there's several setbacks.
Yeah.
Depending.
Yeah, they're different for different things. That's the non-participating.
Right,
Property
non-participating
setback.
dwellings is the highest
For dwellings.
standard.
So what we have currently is we have the minimum distance between wind turbines. So we're separating out, we're not really, we're looking at where a home is and a residence in many of these. I think, and my suggestion is that if we look at number 2, if we go to Article 3, number 2, the minimum distance between a turbine, if we just take out that portion that says occupied dwelling or civil building and just have non-participating property shall be, and then we have that distance, whatever that distance is, I think that then eliminates all of these other issues if we have that setback be from the property line, and then that allows the property owner that wants to put up a windmill, to put up a windmill, and the property owner that doesn't want a windmill and or its effects on their property, they have the right to do that as well. It protects, I think, everybody involved if we do that. And what that number is, I mean, there's been a lot of different numbers thrown around. Right now, we have 1,800 feet from an occupied dwelling, but then we kind of have different ones in there when you get into 3 or 4, where we talk about minimum distances. And I think what we do is that we have minimum distance wind turbine on for many of the following. And if you look at, and I think you came up with the Cedar County one, Tom, was 1,500. We currently have 1,000, right?
Cedar County.
Yeah, you said Cedar County was 1,500?
I don't know that they have it. What they said was that they had, after those fires, I think that the debris traveled 1,500 feet. I saw in the, that lawsuit that I think it was 230 acres that they filed suit that had been damaged, or anyway, they filed suit and claimed that there's 230 acres that suffered damage. And I don't know, I have not seen, I know that I don't think they had an ordinance when they put up those 2 turbines. They might now, because part of the deal is they did not have any requirements for those,
Okay,
to understand for the liability.
So that 1,500 is where the physical damage
That's what, in the, they sent out a little notice, and that was what their contention was, is that there had been debris scattered 1,500 feet.
Okay. So, but I think we take that number from 3, and then we get rid of 4, and have 4A, B, C, and D just be 3, D, E, F, and G. And then we just have that standoff, and it doesn't prevent somebody from having windmills on their property if they want. But it also at the same time protects somebody that wants to have property that's not impeded by said windmills.
There's really a hierarchy in the way this is designed, that an occupied dwelling or civic building has the highest level of protection because that's an existing resource that someone has invested in, it's their home, whereas the property line could encompass farmland, open space, anything. And so this is pretty much typical of every ordinance I've seen, is that there is a hierarchy to that the occupied dwellings on an unparticipating property have the highest level of protection in terms of, and those higher setbacks are meant to address things like shadow flicker, noise. The further you get away, the less that is gonna have an impact on those adjoining properties. Whereas, I think we talk a lot about the scattering of debris, whereas the height of the turbine plus 10%, which is the typical standard for property lines, rights of way, et cetera, that's just ensuring that there is enough, if it were to fall over, that it's not gonna encroach on another property. Whereas, I mean, if anything gets hit by a tornado or there's a storm event that's gonna scatter debris, it happens to everything. It's not just specific to wind turbines. So the idea that we have to set a higher standard based on an event there, and I think the key thing is making sure that when those events do happen, that we have protections in there to address cleanup and ensuring that the land can be restored when a neighboring property owner is affected in an instance like that. Because it's by its nature, it's an exceptional event. Whereas with the shadow flicker and noise, that's a function of the day-to-day operation of the facility. And so by having a higher setback for the homes, that's ensuring that they're protected from that on a day-to-day basis.
Can I say something? I'm trying to stay out of this, but I agree with Trent. When you're looking at from the property, so my property's long and narrow, okay? I've got a house on this side. We are now clearing this part of the property because we want to build on it. So you're saying, oh, it may be filled, it may be, you're still dictating what that person is allowed to do with their own property. You shouldn't have a right to dictate that to them any more than they have a right to dictate to who wants the wind turbines.
Amen.
If somebody puts a wind turbine from my house, that distance, it's gonna be right on my property line. And then I can't do anything with my property.
Yeah, exactly.
But I understand the house occupied dwelling is an existing investment. If we have to regulate based on what anyone could conceivably do with their property in the future.
You shouldn't have to.
But
Nobody should dictate what they can do with their property.
Nobody
land
could
is
do,
an
nobody could do
existing
anything in that case of any type of development. You can't dictate your neighbor gonna build a house right next to you in the future
Right,
either,
but you go to
so-
the property line, so they have their ability to do what they want with their property.
Yes.
Because you don't know what they wanna do.
A house is a
So if you go from the
700
house,
feet tall.
Well, it's both the
you're
house-
now
it's
telling
the
them
house
they can't
and-
do
it's the
anything with the
house
rest
and
of their
the-
property.
It's the house and the property line. There's two separate setbacks, so it has to be certain distance from the home, but also certain
But
distance
it's a
from the
minor
property line.
distance, so I'm actually building a greenhouse out there. I don't want wind turbines flying through my glass windows.
No, I understand.
Okay, so you're still creating a less distance there on the part of property I don't have something done yet. Thinking that, well, that's just blank property. It's still property I purchased, I pay tax dollars on it.
Exactly.
It should be protected. That's just my opinion.
Brad, what do you have?
I think we're mixing a lot of things together. I mean, we're talking about putting up a turbine and scatter, but then we go to a tornado, which is any structure. Well, the turbine height and all those are making it more susceptible to the lightning, and so that's the reason those things come up. It's more dictated by the structure itself. We talk about a house, well, if we had to, control anywhere you could build, then every house would have an offset. A house is not creating an imminent danger to neighboring property, like a wind turbine does. So again, we're trying to explain away issues with things that really aren't relevant by bringing in tornadoes. We're bringing in houses on the property line. We all live in town, or we have neighbors on the farm. Those aren't the issues that are creating potential harm. And so that's where all this confusion's kind of coming from. We're bringing in all these things that really aren't pertinent to the discussion you all are trying to have.
Donna?
I had a tornado 2,600 feet from my house last year. But there wasn't anything that weighed 27,000 pounds flying through the air. It got started from a height of probably 500 feet, 400 feet. This is all experimental. I've had 4 tornadoes in my property. I'm in the heart of this. One picked up a shed, threw it across the cornfield. It flew. It didn't knock down one stalk and landed on my neighbor's fence. Another one took down 10 maple trees. The last one moved my barn over, but the last one last year missed us. But they took everything down on the wall in place, next to the gun club. Now you're telling me, oh geez, this is not gonna happen? How does a tornado work? Tornado at the bottom is a 1/4 mile wide. It's a V shape. But then, the higher we get, the more probability that this blade is gonna be part of the tornado. It might be a 1/4 mile at the peak. It might be a mile across here. So the probability of a tornado hitting one of these windmills is pretty doggone high. I can tell you the Van Tiger place, I can tell you all the places in Mount Union, Danville, this is tornado country. But it's not gonna happen. This is really where, you know why? Windmill companies don't have to report it.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, over the years, the wind turbine industry, correct me if I'm wrong, have made the turbines higher and higher and higher. Is that correct? So these setbacks now, would need to be changed, I would assume, if the turbines keep getting higher, is that correct?
Correct.
We very commonly see in ordinances where it's not based on a set, 1,800 feet, for example, setback, but it's based on some proportion of the turbine. So that's, I think Supervisor Broker mentioned it earlier, at the state level, they had proposed 1.1 times tip height. That would be from the bottom of the tower all the way to the highest point of the blade when it's pointed at the top, times 1.1. And that's industry-wide considered a safe fall distance, but I understand there are other concerns beyond tipping with noise and shadow flickers.
So what are the odds that in 10, 20 years, these things are gonna be 1,000 feet high?
I think, this is obviously on the record, but off the record, I actually think we're starting to kind of reach our limit on the efficiency of the height. This is more of the blades and the equipment that are getting more efficient. The FAA is also starting to say, don't go any higher than this, that doesn't make any sense. But if you set it to a certain turbine proportion setback and any project is permitted to that certain setback at that time, then those turbines that were permitted would be compliant with that. And if a future project comes in with higher turbines, then they would need to comply with that proportionate setback as well.
If they make it proportionate.
If it's proportional, but if we stick to a certain foot by foot setback, then that is a different concern.
Tom, I got a question. The 1,500 foot debris field that you observed or you had information on, how high was that turbine? 400 feet?
I think probably, I don't know exactly how high, but it wasn't as high as 650 or 750, whatever we're talking.
I was just curious.
But yeah, it was, one of them had a, and I don't think they make them anymore, is, one of them had a concrete tower, and that was, they took the one turbine down, and then the wind company didn't want to take the other turbine down, they wanted to blow it up and knock it over, because that was gonna be cheaper, and, that's what they ended doing, and so I think that was part of the reason it was in the air so long, is they fought about what to do with it, and that looked to me like an ugly design.
Yeah.
For what little I know.
I don't know if you guys have seen this, and I'd be happy to forward it to you. I just pulled it up to refresh my memory. There was a turbine that went down in Osceola, or near Osceola, and the map date was from February of 2024. That turbine was only 225 feet, and they have a debris map, and it shows where the debris landed, and the debris was 4.27 times the height, so the debris from a 225 foot turbine went out 960 feet. There's also a map that they shared with the sizes of the debris, and much of the debris was the size of a 6 foot man. So I think we need to remember what we're talking about as far as debris field, and if someone is out there, and that's why the turbine companies typically are the safety manuals typically in 1.1, 1.5, or do they go with feet or kilometers? So I think those are things to
And
think about.
I've seen some, I haven't seen, but I've been looking at some, but some of them will go 1,000 feet or 1,500 or 2,000, whatever the setback might be, or X times the turbine height, 1.5 times the turbine height, to address if the turbine, in other words, so if somebody comes 10 years from now and then they've got turbines that are taller, there's a minimum, and then you compare that to the maximum.
So if we're talking a 4 times debris field too, then you're into, what's the 600 foot, which I think we're talking taller than that, then you're into 3,600 feet at least. The other thing I think we fail to remember is not only debris, but also ice throw. If you think about ice throw off of the blades in the winter, and we have a lot of moisture, ice storms, those kinds of things, I know sometimes the turbines get shut down during those conditions, but that's another thing to consider, is it's not just about if a turbine has a failure or has a storm or that kind of thing, but also what comes off of the blades just in general
I remember
operation.
when we went through this the first time, looking at, doing a little research on ice throw.
So that's gonna be also that debris field, if you will.
Just last night, I read on the internet, I found an article where a piece of the ice hit a guy's truck and totaled his truck. This is not an ice cube, folks.
Yeah.
Allison Moore, near Yarmouth. One thing I hope you'll consider with the setbacks, I don't believe we have a county line setback. I have a friend who lives right on the Louisa County line, and, you know, are we responsible for something that could happen to her property, her animals, you know?
You're right, Allison, I apologize, that was on that list, and somehow I went back. I was gonna ask just exactly what that is. So in other words, it would be a setback from the Des Moines County line. Oh, okay.
We do have a provision in the ordinance as of now which states that it applies to other property, non-participating properties wherever they're located, whether it be inside city limits or an adjoining county.
Yeah, and it adopts the most restrictive. I think when you're talking about, you know, regulating inside Louisa County, that's just not our jurisdiction.
Right.
Right, so, but Jared's right, that's already addressed, and it does say the most restrictive, right?
So it regulates, it would not regulate the development of a wind turbine on the other side of the line in
Right.
Louisa County, but it would take into account the impact of a turbine on this side of the line on other property owners on the other side, is it based on the fact that it's located here, right?
Right. Because that's compliant with that, so that makes it the most restrictive, yeah.
I think we got a ways to go on this. I'd like to have another work session next week after this. There's been some other.
Do we wanna decide just a specific topic for that work session and try to tackle these one at a time?
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm ready.
definitely.
Setback.
And I think, I really think it's gonna be on the permitting, how we do that, because we can't really get started with the rest of it until we get that permitting sorted out.
Okay.
I've got several notes here today, thank everybody for giving me some of this information, but,
Could you or some, give me some information on just exactly what the permitting the actual work's gonna require? I mean, what, in other words, you would have to go through, rather than just turbine locations, if you do a parcel by parcel. And
I think some of that's outlined in there about what needs to be submitted.
Right,
It
and
kind
so-
of lays out everything that they have to include in their permit application.
You aren't gonna
so-
just sit down and sign a permit and say, by the way, I want a permit.
No, there's a bunch of
There's a
things we
great
have to
deal
make
of-
sure that they.
Great deal of work
that they
that goes
submit
into
to us,
preparing
yeah.
that, yeah.
And if there's some information, make sure you guys email us at board, BOARD, @dmcounty.com. Send us some information. The more the, the better. It's not gonna.
One thing I do wanna mention is, through the process for developing the ordinance in Lee County, we did get some insight on this from the developer perspective about how this is typically handled in other counties. And one, I think, oversight initially with the initial Des Moines County ordinance was this was all structured as a single process, where you submit a application, it goes through the full review process, reviewing all the technical documents and studies, and then the board makes a decision. Well, typically it's handled in a two-step process where there's a conditional approval initially, where the developer is not 100% finalized on the plans, but they have the overall idea of what it's gonna look like. And so there's an initial review that where you get to look more at the specific location, any unique issues that might pertain to that particular site, and then that, once that's approved, then that gives the developer the assurance to go ahead and finalize, get the exact location and information for the final permit. And then the final permit from there is just ensuring that the facility meets all the minimum requirements from then on out. So I think that helps in terms of having a two-phase process where it's not all in one, and it gives an initial opportunity to weed out some of the major issues at the outset, rather than just here we're getting started on it, and it's just, how long is this gonna take to get here? It could potentially be more than a year to go through all of that. So I think that two-step process would be very beneficial to making it clear how that permitting process is gonna look.
Rose, what's
I
that?
was curious to know if that initial review was part of your duties as land use administrator, or if that's something you charge extra for.
No, that's just part of our contract that we have annually with the supervisors.
So there wouldn't be an additional fee for pre-review?
No.
Well, it does mention that if needed for some of those technical documents, to have an outside consultant that the county brings in to review and ensure compliance that way, that would be specific to the development. But from the administrator's standpoint, we're just there to ultimately make the determination, did the applicant submit X, Y, Z, and make the recommendation of the board going forward. So that's really regardless of how big the development is, where it's located, that would be just part of the standard administrative services.
The county engineer or another engineer would have to review the roads and
Right.
any of those things, the drainage issue. So that wouldn't come out of your office.
Operations and maintenance,
Yeah.
other studies.
Yeah, Joe.
Bob, actually. One thing
Bob,
if I could
don't
mention,
be Joe.
when you folks make these rules, you say, okay, they're in violation of this or violation of that. I've had rental contracts for years and stuff. It's one thing to say you're in violation, it's another thing to be able to do something about it. For instance, if they break your roads, okay, they're in violation, great, we're in violation on 300 of them, what's another? But how could you force either a fine that you put up that says, if you're in violation, you pay this much, you restore it to pre-use? Things like that, you might look at your wording on it. The other thing with decommissioning, you say they have to decommission it. Well, do they have to just get rid of it to land level? I'm familiar with Henry counties, I've read that 60-page contract dozens of times. They only have to go 3 foot below the dirt surface and they can leave the rest of it.
Our decommissioning standards require them to take it all out.
All of it, okay.
And restore it to pre-installation condition.
Yeah,
So
Henry
I'm
County
pretty
was 3
close to
foot, and at that time, you've got less value on the land, potentially a landowner could say, lower my taxes on these few acres. I can't grow corn on 3 foot of dirt.
So, and that's one of the things we need to address, because that's one of the instances where we had it based on the supervisor's discretion. So, we haven't gotten that far, that's a different topic, I don't know if Jim wants to go there. But, that's one thing where CSR, like up front, a CSR requirement, it would be, a 65 CSR requirement would be a ban, right? But to say that, hey, the average CSR in Des Moines County is 85, and there's some documentation, I got it by the state on that. But, so then I think that's probably gonna be at least my recommendation to you guys, is if it's CSR 85, that's the average in the county, let's have it be returned to that. That's, everybody understands what a CSR is, and we're getting rid of that problem that Updegraff pointed out. But that's moving on from one point to the next. But you're right, what we have does require removing everything.
And I
Yes.
would think, to be fair, rather than bringing it to whatever the average is, you would have if a property was already at a 40 CSR or 45, and I know very little about that, except that there's a lot of calculations and it stands for corn suitability ratio. I don't think you can get it to a 65 or something like that if it started out at a 45.
Maybe,
So,
and I don't.
You would have to
you could
address
do
some
that.
of that, but no, I agree, you need to quantify it or describe it rather than at the discretion of the Board of Supervisors.
Yeah.
Apparently that's.
You like that standard, don't you?
Well, no, my wife doesn't even like that standard.
I have one more question about the fee. In the permitting section, it says payment of the required administrative fee as outlined in section G. So that goes back to whatever you guys decide the fee structure is. Who receives that administrative fee then? Is that what will be passed along to Southeast Iowa Regional Planning?
That would be the county. They're under contract. I don't remember how much for it. They've got a year-to-year contract.
The 3-year
They've got
contract
every
that was
3 year
signed here
I think
recently,
it's
is
a
that-
3-year
Yeah,
contract.
we don't get paid, all the payments go directly
Okay,
to
well, I was just
Moines County.
considering,
We don't get extra for
questioning since
these
it said
permits.
administrative fees, so.
Yeah.
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 Okay.
Yeah,
I
right.
don't, what does, and I don't remember the original ordinance, you guys, what does it refer to, on what constitutes a wind farm? Does it refer to, a lot of them does as CWEX or?
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Because,
CWEX is that.
you know, every one of these hearings we bring up Mechanicsville, right? The horror that project was. Does that even fit what a CWEX is? That was not a commercial wind farm. That was a company building 2 prototype wind turbines to test their product that failed miserably and made a horrible mess. So I'm just saying, I'm not arguing, I just, make sure your ordinance covers if Siemens wants to put up a prototype wind turbine that never was meant to generate electricity for the public's good, that it falls under your same criteria, because a good attorney could probably argue out that Mechanicsville doesn't fall under this because they were never meant to generate, you know.
That's very much, and incidentally, I think I saw in the newspaper article that Nordex, that was they either own that company or they put those, Conia?
Axiona, yeah.
Axio, I suppose. Anyway, that Nordex was owned that, I assume that's where the Nordex manual came from.
Which they built those right across the highway, the interstate just south of there. I mean, everybody thought it was gonna be the greatest thing. I mean, we put them up, we tore them down, but, I mean, they did not do their part to keep them running because they didn't care about producing electricity off them, right? I mean, they were testing it was a prototype, I mean, is what it was, and it
Whatever
turned
the
into an
motivations
absolute
were, they
mess.
didn't care.
Yeah, I mean, and it showed, you know, unfortunately, but, and nobody wants that in their county.
Is this an experiment? My big question, from just common sense, living to be an old guy, is why would a company have to go out and pay people to get something that they promise is gonna make them $100,000 a year once that thing gets running? They're producers just like we are in corn and soybeans. But if you don't have a buyer on this end, they don't go anywhere. The juice you produce at night, we have 168 kilowatts with a 30-mile-an-hour wind at night. What are you gonna do, put them in a battery? Why do you have to bribe these farmers with money right up top? If I thought that this company is gonna make me $100,000, I'll sign up right now, forget about it. Why do you have to bribe people? Is your company model, you gotta give to get? That's my question. I assume they do that to acquire the leases. If I could make 100,000, come on. Well, give me a contract like that. Some people wanna see something now. I don't know, I'm not in the business, I'm just assuming if you're gonna get a long-term lease on something, it costs. Sign up is $8,000 to $33,000. That's the industry. That's outside the scope of this ordinance, whatever two individuals or two entities want to, financial agreement they make is theirs.
Well, I think we've got some stuff to go on for next week. So let's wrap it up. Thanks for everybody coming. I expect to see you all next week.
Thank you.
Evie? I've got a couple questions I want to ask you before you leave.
These terms that we're considering,